Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Funky Bunch of Sunday Brunch Podcast. How are you all doing? Are you having a great day? You got your coffee ready? You got your tea ready? You got whatever you have to drink ready? I hope you are, because we're jumping right back into the thick of it. Now, if you remember, we left off last time with the Mmorpg. So for a very quick rundown of what of an Mmorpg, a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, or Mmorpg, they emerged in the mid to late 1990s as a commercial graphical variant of text-based MUDs, which had existed since 1978. By and large, Mmorpg featured the usual Mmorpg featured the usual RPG objectives of completing quests and strengthening one's character, but involve up to hundreds of players interacting with each other on the same persistent world in real time. The massively multiplayer concept was quickly combined with other genres. Fantasy MMORPG like Final Fantasy XI, Lord of the Rings Online, Shadows of Angmar, and The Elder Scrolls Online remain the most popular types of MMOG, with the most popular pay-to-play game being World of Warcraft, and the most popular free-to-play being RuneScape and Terra. Yet other types of MMORPG are appearing. Sci-fi MMORPG, like Phantasy Star Online, hold a smaller part of the market, with the popular space sci-fi game EVE Online being the most notable. Other massively multiplayer online games which do not have conventional RPG settings include Second Life and Ingress, which I guess you could throw Pogo into there as well. Alright, now it's time for us to pick up where we left off, which is looking at MMORPGs in society and culture. Specifically, this is looking at the psychological effects of the MMORPG. And of course, there's a small caveat, which is that there is potential questionable content here because, well, I mean, this is off of Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is flagging this as maybe not necessarily accurate, unsure, needs more people to contribute. So I will be throwing out my 3 cents as we do this as well. But there are obviously fears which are generally unfounded and yada yada because of video games. Anyway, since the interactions between MMORPG players are real, even if the environments are virtual, psychologists and sociologists are able to use MMORPGs as tools for academic research. Sherry Turkle has found that many people have expanded their emotional range by exploring the many different roles, including gender identities, that MMORPGs allow a person to explore. Nick Yee has surveyed more than 35,000 MMORPG players over the past several years. I wish they would give me, actual, dates and say July past several years, focusing on psychological and sociological aspects of these games. Recent findings included that 15% of players become a guild leader at one time or another, but most generally find the job tough and thankless, and that players spend a considerable amount of time, often a third of their total time investment, doing things that are external to gameplay but part of the metagame. You can almost combine that with work, Well, we find that a small portion of workers actually stay at the company, become managers, but most people don't want to stay there because it's a tough and thankless job. Very true of any kind of a manager type job. And of course, players could spend a considerable amount of time outside of, work, doing things related to work. Well, that's just kind of what happens. Many players report that the emotions they feel while playing an MMORPG are very strong, to the extent that 8.7% of males and 23.2% of female players in a statistical study have had an online wedding. Other researchers have found that the enjoyment of a game is directly related to the social organization of a game, ranging from brief encounters between players to highly organized play in structured groups. In a study by Zahir Hassan and Mark D. Griffiths, it was found that just over 1 in 5 gamers, 21%, said they preferred socializing online to offline. I am also one of those people. Real-life encounters are very difficult. Significantly more male gamers to female gamers said that they found it easier to converse online than offline. It was also found that 57% of gamers had created a character of the opposite gender, and it is suggested that the online female persona has a number of positive social attributes. A German fMRT study conducted by researchers at the Central Institute of Mental Health points towards impairments in social, emotional, and physical aspects of the self-concept and a higher degree in avatar identification in addicted MMORPG players compared to non-addictive and naive, non-experienced people. These findings generally support Davis's cognitive behavioral model of internet addiction, which postulates that dysfunctional, self-related cognitions represent central factors contributing toward the development and maintenance of MMORPG addiction. The high degree of avatar identification found by Lemanger et al. In the addicted group of this study indicates that the MMORPG playing may represent an attempt to compensate for impairments in self-concept. Psychotherapeutic interventions should therefore focus on the development of coping strategies for real-life situations in which addicted players tend to experience themselves as incompetent and inferior. But here's the thing about this. A lot of people who spend hours upon hours generating the avatar that they like and then pouring countless hours into improving and making that avatar the best that they can have a very big emotional attachment. That's almost like what you do with literally anything. Remember the pet rock craze? But that's not an addiction. A pet rock is normal. It's just a virtual, consider it almost like a virtual pet. Nobody cares if you obsess and dote over your cat or your dog. But if your cat or your dog was online, all of a sudden it's an issue. It's like people are taking things that were common behavior, but out in public. And when people do it alone on the internet, it becomes a problem. The bigger problem is that people don't like the fact that more people are isolating themselves and being out of the public eye, and instead having these entire days just filled with being online. It's people who don't understand, people who don't like, maybe people who had a bad experience and therefore wants to ruin it for everybody. There's all types of things. I just don't think a lot of these... I will admit, there is obviously an addiction to, gaming. I mean, there's an addiction to lots of different things. But trying to classify it in different ways, so here's a good... the psychotherapeutic interventions should focus on the development of coping strategies for real-life situations in which addicted players tend to experience themselves as incompetent or inferior. That's a good idea, but here's the problem. If you take somebody away from the place where they actually feel competent and they can, communicate and contribute in some meaningful way, even if it's a clan online, you're going to be doing more damage than not, because you're saying you're doing this wrong. You need to do it like this. You're going to make them feel inferior. You're going to make them feel incompetent, and they're going to shut themselves away even more. Yeah, you may get them offline, but guess what? Now they're alone. you know? It's not... What they are considering an addiction there is not the kind of addiction that people think. Like, it's not a real... Like, I'm not trying to say, like, some addictions are not real. Some addictions are real. It's like... somebody relating to their avatar, yeah, maybe they are reflecting, what they wish they could be. But you know what? Who the heck doesn't? Who doesn't look in the mirror and imagine themselves something else, But guess what? They're grounded in society, so they have to just suck it up and be like, well, I can't be anything else. And these people have been able to find a way to go online and become that avatar of their dreams. And now people are coming in and being like, well, too bad. I don't care. You can't have that because that's not realistic. And that is the problem to me. Instead of telling people that they're addicted and they have a problem and they need to be in the real world, you need to be figuring out, why are these people online? Why do they feel like they can't communicate with people in the real world? Why are they so attached to their avatar? Maybe it's someone dealing with grief and loss and they created an avatar of a family member, a loved one, Maybe it's somebody who's just so fed up with a handicapped person, so fed up with being restricted and weak, and they can play as an incredibly strong and agile character, What if this person is a mute, but is like the leader of the largest clan in World of Warcraft, and is like the best leader that they've ever seen? You don't know. And instead of just attacking and being like, you're addicted, you need to stop, be like, so why do you do this? Why do you feel this way? And there's a huge... So the only time I think that a, quote, internet addiction, gaming addiction is a problem, because there are a lot of people with addictions if you think about it. There's health food addiction. It's just... doing something a lot is not an addiction. The only time I keep getting distracted, but all right, one idea. The one time I think addictions become a problem are when they start to impact you, i.e., video game addiction or internet addiction, okay? This becomes a problem if, one, you stop going to work. If you're a working adult, if you stop going to work, you stop paying the bills, you stop taking care of yourself, you stop taking care of your pets, you stop taking care of people you live with, you start to let the video games, the internet, take up all of your time. You don't bathe, you don't sleep, you don't eat, you don't work. You just let it control your life. That is an addiction and something that needs to be taken a look at, because it is negatively impacting. What about the person on the other hand? Maybe they play like a half of the amount of hours as this addicted person is, but they go to work, they sleep, they take care of themselves. They have a child, and they're taking care of that child. But you know what? They're still playing significantly more than just the average player. But that person's considered addicted. And it's considered a bad thing. That's where it's just like... I mean... we throw the word addiction around very quickly and very easily, which is why we're constantly changing what's an addiction, too. It's whatever happens to be in the news. Video game addiction became pretty big around Columbine. And they've been trying to pin video games on gun violence ever since. It's a societal... let's boil this down. Internet addiction, video game addiction, this has nothing to do with addiction. It has everything to do with society disapproving of introverts becoming extroverted online. Because suddenly all the people who thought that they were super smart and outgoing are suddenly being overshadowed by the quiet kid, the quiet nerd. And it's upsetting the balance. Because I know people who have used WoW to gain social skills in order to be able to start standing up for themselves. And just being able to, be a productive member in society. Learning skills on how to do lots of different things. And it kind of upset people because they're like, what happened to the quiet kid who just did whatever they were told? It's just... But that's an entirely other topic. So, let's continue on our reading, shall we? Richard Bartle, author of Designing Virtual Worlds, classified multiplayer RPG players into 4 primary psychological groups. His classifications were then expanded upon by Erwin Andreasen, who developed the concept into the 30-question Bartle test that helps players determine what category they are associated with. With over 650,000 test responses as of 2011, this is perhaps the largest ongoing survey of multiplayer game players. Based on Bartle and Yee's research, John Radoff has published an updated model of player motivation that focuses on immersion, competition, cooperation, and achievement. These elements may be found not only in an MMORPG, but other types of games and within the emerging field of gamification. What is gamification? The strategic attempt to enhance systems, services, organizations, and activities in order to create similar experiences to those experienced when playing games in order to motivate and engage users. In World of Warcraft, a temporary design glitch attracted the attention of psychologists and epidemiologists across North America when the corrupted blood disease of a monster began to spread unintentionally and uncontrollably into the wider game world. The Centers for Disease Control used the incident as a research model to chart both the progression of a disease and the potential human response to large-scale epidemic infection. Fun fact, World of Warcraft had the exact same as COVID, but it was kind of the same. It was... the people of WoW handled it significantly better than the people of the real world. What do you mean you've never heard it pronounced that way? Gamification? Or epidemiology? Yes. Okay. All right. And I think our last topic for MMORPG is economics. Many MMORPGs feature living economies. Virtual items and currency have to be gained through play and have definite value for players. Oh, like gamification. I see. All right, let's try this again. Many MMORPGs feature living economies. Virtual items and currency have to be gained through play and have definite value for players. Such a virtual economy can be analyzed using data logged by the game and has value in economic research. More significantly, these virtual economies can affect the economies of the real world. One of the early researchers of MMORPGs was Edvard Castronova, who demonstrated that a supply and demand market exists for virtual items and that it crosses over with the real world. The crossover has some requirements of the game. The ability for players to sell an item to each other for in-game virtual currency. Bartering for items between players for items of similar value. The purchase of in-game items for real-world currency. Exchanges of real-world currency for virtual currencies. And the invention of user-created metacurrencies such as dragon kill points to distribute in-game rewards. The idea of attaching real-world value to virtual items has had a profound effect on players in the game industry, and even the court system. The virtual currency selling pioneer, IGE, received a lawsuit from a World of Warcraft player for interfering in the economics and intended use of the game by selling WoW gold. Castronova's first study in 2002 found that a highly liquid, if illegal, currency market existed, with the value of EverQuest's in-game currency exceeding that of the Japanese yen. Some people even make a living by working these virtual economies. These people are referred to as gold farmer and may be employed in game sweatshops. That is actually a use. I don't know if it's still a thing, but it definitely used to be a thing. People would literally spend days just farming up millions of gold and then selling it. And people would buy it with real money so that they can get the gold without doing the effort. It's basically satirizing the market. Game publishers usually prohibit the exchange of real-world money for virtual goods, but others actively promote the idea of linking and directly profiting from an exchange. In Second Life and Entropia universe, the virtual economy and the real-world economy are directly linked. That means that real money can be deposited for game money and vice versa. Real-world items have been sold for game money in Entropia, and some players of Second Life have generated revenues in excess of $100,000. Some of the issues confronting online economies include the use of bots or automated programs that assist some players in accumulating in-game wealth to the disadvantage of other players. The use of unsanctioned auction sites, which has led publishers to seek legal remedies to prevent their use based on intellectual property claims. The emergence of virtual crime, which can take the form of both fraud against the player or publisher of an online game, and even real-life acts of violence stemming from in-game transactions. Linking real-world and virtual economies is rare in MMORPGs, as it is generally believed to be detrimental to gameplay. If real-world wealth can be used to obtain greater, more immediate rewards than skillful gameplay, the incentive for strategic roleplay and real game involvement is diminished. It could also easily lead to a skewed hierarchy where richer players gain better items, allowing them to take on stronger opponents and level up more quickly than the less wealthy but more committed players. And that is one of the issues I have with pay-to-play games. They are legitimately all about pay-to-play. You pay, you play, you win. At all. It's just, it's a problem. And yeah, that's why I dislike, like, some of you know we're going off on another tangent, but some of you know that I play Harry Potter. I don't even remember what its full title is. What is your full title, Harry Potter? I still have the game open. Whoops. It's called... Come on. Hogwarts Mystery. So, Hogwarts Mystery was great and all, You had the whole option. At the beginning, this was no issue, which was you had the option to exchange real-world money for in-game currency, aka gems, because the game is based on energy, To advance through, classes or, the story, you have to spend, one energy. One energy gets refreshed every 4 minutes. And as you do certain things, the amount of energy you can hold grows naturally. The game starts off with, 10. I currently have, 50. So that means, to get a full thing that takes 200 minutes to fully replenish my bar. So that's, 3 hours and 20 minutes. Which to me, I'm like, okay, that's cool. I can play my thing and then go away. And there's plenty of ways to get free. But also, you could pay to get gems to then use gems to automatically refresh your energy. Which, you know what? Hey, if you want to pay to advance faster through the story, good for you. But then, in an effort to slow down players from getting through the story, because it's still ongoing. I used to be sitting right at the very edge where, the game's just like, hey, we're still developing. We release a new chapter every other week. They started throwing out events. Every couple of days, you have a new event. They're not events. They're more like challenges, but they're events. And what you're doing is, it's like, accumulate this many class points, and then as you get X amount of points throughout the whole thing, you get different rewards. You get money, you get gems, you get outfits. Once again, if you're paying, yeah, you're going to get those outfits because you're paying for it. But the real issue came when they started challenging players against each other. Whoever gained the most points got the first prize. Then the second most got the second, third, fourth, yada, yada, yada. And that became an issue. Because now you're directly competing with someone to be able to get these free cosmetic items. And they're directly going against people who are blatantly spending a lot of money. And you can tell who's spending a lot of money. Because they're miles above where you would be able to go even if you played the most devotedly. And it's like, and that makes, I don't even participate in those anymore. I'm just like, screw it. I'm not paying to compete against these people for something that I'm not even going to wear in the game. But I figured out how to kind of game that anyway. If you don't, if you actually do really bad, they put you with more players who are really bad in the hopes that you'll start spending a little bit more. So whenever I'm thrown back into one of those bad groups, I just shoot up to the top because I know how to very efficiently take care of that game. But yeah, that was a slight tangent on pay to play, which I hate. Anyway, moving on to the mother of MMORPGs, which is what the MMORPG was based around and further expanded upon, is the MUD. A MUD, or a multi-user dungeon, or multi-user dimension, or multi-user domain, whatever you prefer, is a multiplayer, real-time virtual world, usually text-based. MUDs combine elements of role-playing games, hack and slash, PvP, interactive fiction, and online chat. Players can read or view descriptions of rooms, objects, other players, non-playable characters, and actions performed in the virtual world. Players typically interact with each other and the world by typing commands that resemble a natural language. Traditional MUDs implement a role-playing video game set in a fantasy world populated by fictional races and monsters. with players choosing classes in order to gain specific skills or powers. The objective of this sort of game is to slay monsters, explore a fantasy world, complete quests, go on adventures, create a story by role-playing, and advance the created character. Many MUDs were fashioned around the dice-rolling rules of Dungeons & Dragons series of games. Such fantasy settings for MUDs are common, while many others have sci-fi settings or are based on popular books, movies, animations, periods of histories, worlds populated by anthropomorphic animals, and so on. Not all MUDs are games. Some are designed for educational purposes, while others are purely chat environments, and the flexible nature of many MUD servers lead to the occasional use in areas ranging from computer science research to geoinformatics to medical information to analytical chemistry. Here's a fun fact. The U.S. political system actually had to implement a quote-unquote MUD for the 2020 election, actually, because they needed to take a look at potential outcomes for the presidential election. They needed to be able to take a look at what would happen if Trump won by a landslide. What would happen if Trump won but barely? What happened if Biden won just barely? And what happens if Biden won with a landslide? They were trying to prepare for the worst case scenario, so they had to look at many different factors. And they assembled the greatest minds that they could of various different areas, political scientists, historians, Republicans, Democrats, just kind of everyone trying to get a good feel. And so that's a good example of a MUD in real life, kind of. Anyway, MUDs have attracted the interest of academic scholars from many fields, including communication, sociology, law, and economics. At one time, there was interest from the United States military in using them for teleconferencing. Most MUDs are run as hobbies and are free to play. Some may accept donations or allow players to purchase virtual items, while others charge a monthly subscription fee. MUDs can be accessed via standard Telnet clients or specialized MUD clients, which are designed to improve the user experience. Numerous games are listed at various web portals, such as the MUD Connector. The history of modern, massively multiplayer online role-playing games like EverQuest and Ultima Online, and related virtual world genres such as social virtual worlds, exemplified by Second Life, can be traced back to the MUD genre. Indeed, before the invention of the term MMORPG, games of this style were simply called Graphical Mud. A number of influential MMORPG designers began as MUD developers and or players, such as Raph Koster, Brad McQuaid, Matt Firer, and Brian Green, who were involved with early MUDs. So, the history. So, the origins of the MUD. Colossal Cave Adventure. We've heard Colossal Cave Adventure like dozens of times in our 4 months of video game genre analysis. Created in 1975 by Will Crowther. Oh gosh. On a DEC PDP-10 computer. It was the first widely used adventure game. The game was significantly expanded in 1976 by Don Woods. Also called Adventure, it contained many D&D features and references, including a computer-controlled dungeon master. Numerous dungeon crawlers were created on the Plato system in the University of Illinois and other American universities that used Plato beginning in 1975. Among them were Petit 5, Oubliette, Moria, Avatar, Crozar, Dungeon, D&D, Crypt, and Dry Gulch. By 1978-79, these games were heavily in use on various Plato systems and exhibited a marked increase in sophistication in terms of 3D graphics, storytelling, user involvement, team play, and death of objects and monsters in the dungeons. Inspired by adventure, a group of students at MIT in the summer of 1977 wrote a game for the PDP-10 minicomputer called Zork. It became quite popular on the ARPANET. Zork was ported under the file name Dungen, or Dungeon, but it was labeled Dungen, to Fortran, Fortran, by a programmer working at DEC in 1978. In 1978, Roy Trubshaw, a student at the University of Essex in the UK, started working on a multi-user adventure game in the Macro 10 assembly language for a DEC PDP 10. He named the game Mud, Multi-User Dungeon, in tribute to the dungeon variant of Zork, which Trubshaw had greatly enjoyed playing. Trubshaw converted Mud to BCPL, the predecessor of C, before handing over development to Richard Bartle, a fellow student at the University of Essex in 1980. The game revolved around gaining points to one achieve the wizard rank, giving the character immortality and special powers over mortals. So, wider access and earlier derivatives. Mud, better known as Essex Mud and Mud 1 in later years, ran on the University of Essex network and became more widely accessible when a guest account was set up that allowed users on Janet, a British academic X25 computer network, to connect on weekends and between the hours of 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. on weekdays. It became the first internet multiplayer online role-playing game in 1980, when the university connected its internal network to ARPANET. The original Mud game was closed down in the late 1987, reportedly under pressure from CompuServe, to whom Richard Bartle had licensed the game. This left Myst, a derivative of Mud 1, with similar gameplay as the only remaining Mud running on the University of Essex network, becoming one of the first of its kind to attain broad popularity. Myst ran until the machine that hosted it, a PDP-10, was superseded in early 1991. 1985 saw the origin of a number of projects inspired by the original Mud. These included Gods, a Mud 1 clone that included online creation in its endgame, and which became a commercial Mud in 1988. And Mirror World, a Tolkien-esque Mud created by Pip Cordry, who gathered some people on a BBS he ran to create a Mud 1 clone that would run on a home computer. Neil Newell, an avid Mud 1 player, started programming his own Mud called Shades during Christmas 1985 because Mud 1 was closed during the holidays. Starting out as a hobby, Shades became accessible in the UK as a commercial Mud via British Telecom's Prestel and Micronet networks. A scandal on Shades led to the closure of Micronet, as described in Indra Sinha's net memoir, The Cyber Gypsies. At the same time, CompuNet started a project named Multi-User Galaxy Game as a science fiction alternative to Mud 1, a copy of which they were running on their system at the time. When one of the two programmers left CompuNet, the remaining program, Alan Lenton, decided to rewrite the game from scratch and named it Federation 2. At the time, no Federation 1 existed. The Mud was officially launched in 1989. Federation 2 was later picked up by AOL, where it became simply known as Federation Adult Space Fantasy. Federation later left AOL to run on its own after AOL began offering unlimited service. I would love an adult space fantasy. Other early Mud-like games. In 1978, around the same time Roy Trubshaw wrote Mud, Alan E. Kleitz wrote a game called Scepter, or the Scepter of Goth, and later called it Mileu, using multi-Pascal on CDC Cyber 6600 series mainframe, which was operated by the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium. Kleitz ported Mileu to an IBM XT in 1983, naming the new port Scepter of Goth. Scepter supported 10 to 16 simultaneous users, which is kind of impressive for a 1983 game. Typically connecting in by modem. It was the first commercial Mud. Franchises were sold to a number of locations. Scepter was first owned and run by Gambit of Minneapolis, Minnesota, founded by Bob Alberti. Gambit's assets were later sold to Interplay Productions. In 1984, Mark Peterson wrote The Realm of Angmar, beginning as a clone of Scepter of Goth. In 1994, Peterson rewrote The Realm of Angmar, adopting it to MS-DOS, the basis for many dial-in BBS systems, and renamed it Swords of Chaos. For a few years, this was a very popular form of Mud, hosted on a number of BBS systems until widespread internet access eliminated most BBSs. In 1984, Mark Jacobs created and deployed a commercial gaming site, Gamers World. The site included 2 games coded and designed by Jacobs, a Mud called Aradath, which was later renamed, upgraded, and ported to Genie as Dragon's Gate, and a 4X science fiction game called Galaxy, which was also ported to Genie. At its peak, the site had 100 monthly subscribers to both Aradath and Galaxy. Genie was shut down in the late 1990s, although Dragon's Gate was later brought to AOL before it was finally released on its own. Dragon's Gate was closed February 10th, 2007. Holy crap. In the summer of 1980, University of Virginia classmates John Taylor and Kelton Flynn wrote Dungeons of Kesmi, a 6-player game inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, which used roguelike ASCII graphics. They founded the Kesmi Company in 1982, and in 1985, an enhanced version of Dungeons of Kesmi, Island of Kesmi, was launched on CompuServe. Later, its 2D graphical descendant, Legends of Kesmi, was launched on AOL in 1996. The games were retired commercially in 2000. The popularity of Mud of the University of Essex tradition escalated in the United States during the late 1980s when affordable personal computers with 300 to 2400 bits per second. Oh my God. Could you imagine having a 300 to 2400 bit per second modem? That is crazy. Yeah, this stream, you would have gotten maybe like 4 pixels at this point. Maybe. How many bits make up a frame? Not enough. Anyway, when affordable personal computers, 300 to 2400 bits per second modems enabled role players to log into multi-line BBSs and online service providers such as CompuServe. During this time, it was sometimes said that MUD stood for Multi-Undergraduate Destroyer, due to the popularity among college students and the amount of time devoted to them. Avalon, The Legend Lives, was published by Yehuda Simmons in 1989. It was the first persistent game world of its kind without the traditional hourly resets and points-based puzzle-solving progressive systems. Avalon introduced equilibrium and balance, aka cooldowns, skill-based PvP combat, and concepts such as player-run governments and player housing. So, here are a couple of the variants. So there's the Aber Mud, which is the first popular Mud code-based, written in 1987 by Alan Cox. Alan Cox had played the original University of Essex Mud, and the gameplay was heavily influenced by it. Aber Mud was initially written in B for a Honeywell L66 mainframe under GCOS3/TSS. In late 1988, it was ported to C, which enabled it to spread rapidly to many Unix platforms upon its release in 1989. Abermud's popularity resulted in several inspired works, the most notable of which were Tiny Mud, LP Mud, and Deku Mud. Tiny Mud Monster was a multi-user adventure game created by Richard Skrenta for the VAX and written in VMS Pascal. It was publicly released in November of 1988. Monster was disc-based, and modifications to the game were immediate. Monster pioneered the approach of allowing players to build the game world, setting in new puzzles or creating dungeons for other players to explore. Monster, which comprised of about 60,000 lines of code, had a lot of features which appeared to be designed to allow Colossal Cave Adventure to work in it. Though there never were many network-accessible Monster servers, it inspired James Aspness to create a stripped-down version of Monster, which he called Tiny Mud. Tiny Mud, written in C and released in late 1989, spawned a number of descendants, including Tiny Muck and Tiny Mush. Tiny Muck version 2 contained a full programming language named Muff, multi-user fourth, while Mush generally expanded the command interface. To distance itself from the combat-oriented traditional MUDs, it was said that the D in Tiny Mud stood for multi-user domain or dimension. Thus, along with the eventual popularity of acronyms other than MUD, such as Muck, Mush, Muse, and so on, for this kind of server led to the eventual adoption of the term Mu** to refer to the Tiny Mud family. Ubermud, Untermud, and Moo were inspired by Tiny Mud, but are not direct descendants. Tiny Mud is also used to refer to the first database run under the Tiny Mud codebase, which is also known as Tiny Mud Classic. It ran from August 1989 to April 1990 and still comes back every August during a holiday called Brigadoon Day, a reference to the Scottish village in the musical Brigadoon. Hourglass. The first version of Hourglass was written by Yehuda Simmons and later Daniel James for Avalon: The Legend Lives, which debuted in 1989 at the last of the London Mud mega meets, aptly named Adventure of 89, and initially hosted on the Iowa system. Initially written in ARM assembly language on the Acorn Archimedes 440 in 1994, it made the leap to the venerable Archimedes to Debian Linux on the PC and later Red Hat, where, other than shifting to Ubuntu, it has remained ever since. An early version of Hourglass was also ported to the PC, named Vortex, in 1992. Although written specifically for Avalon: The Legend Lives, it went on to spawn a number of games, including Avalon: The First Age, which ran from 1999 to 2014. The now defunct 1996 Age of Thorns, and notably Archaea: Dreams of Divine Lands, started life in Vortex prior to moving to its own Rapture engine. Hourglass continues to be developed as of 2016, and Avalon: The Legend Lives currently has 2,901,325 written words and 2,248,374 lines of game code, with 2,417,900 instructions. The original game came at 1 kilobyte in 1989, compared to the 102 gigabytes in January of 2016. It has just very, so slightly evolved in 27 years. LP Mud. In 1989, LP Mud was developed by Lars Pinso, hence the LP in LP Mud. Pinso had been an avid player of Tiny Mud and Abermud, and wanted to create a world with the flexibility of Tiny Mud and the gameplay of Abermud. In order to accomplish this, he wrote what is nowadays known as a virtual machine, which he called LP Mud Driver, that ran the C-like LPC programming language used to create the game world. Pinso's interest in LP Mud eventually waned and development was carried on by others. During the early 1990s, LP Mud was one of the most popular Mud codebases. Descendants of the original LP Mud include Mud OS, DGD, SWLPC, Fluff OS, and the Pike programming language. The latter, the work of longtime LP Mud developer Frederick Hubinet. Deku Mud. In 1990, the release of Deku Mud, which was inspired by Abermud, led to the virtual explosion of hack-and-slash MUDs based upon its code. Deku Mud inspired numerous derivative codebases, including Circle Mud, Merc, ROM, Smog, and God Wars. The original Deku team comprised of Sebastian Hammer, blah blah blah. Deku Mud had a key influence on the early evolution of the MMORPG genre, with EverQuest, created by an avid Deku Mud player, displaying such Deku-like gameplay that Variant developers were made to issue a sworn statement that no actual Deku Mud code was incorporated. And then there's Simutronics. In 1987, David Watley, having previously played Scepter of Goth and Island of Kesmi, founded Simutronics with Tom and Susan Zielinski. In the same year, they demonstrated a prototype of Gemstone to Genie. After a short-lived instance of Gemstone 2, Gemstone 3 was officially launched in February of 1990. Gemstone 3 became available on AOL in September of 1995, followed by the release of Dragon Realms in February of 1996. By the end of 1997, Gemstone 3 and Dragon Realms had become the first and second most played games on AOL. It's kind of crazy just to think about all these old, like, things that if we hadn't have had them, what we would have today would be vastly different. It's just weird to think about. But gameplay. The typical MUD will describe to the player the room or area they are standing in, listing the objects, players, and NPCs in the area, as well as all the exits. To carry out a task, the player would enter a text command such as take apple or attack dragon. Movement around the game environment is generally accomplished by entering the direction or the abbreviation of it in which the player wishes to move. For example, typing north or just N will cause the player to exit the current area via the path to the north. MUD clients often contain functions which make certain tasks within a MUD easier to carry out. For example, command buttons which you click in order to move in an appropriate direction or pick up an item. There are also tools available which add hotkey activated macros, telnet, and MUD clients, giving the player to move around the MUD using arrow keys on the keyboard, for example. Like everything we take for granted, like using arrow keys to move up, down, left, right, you know, all of that is just taking the programming language in like MUD and just macroed it. Everything we do is a macro. Okay, so the style. While there have been many variations in overall focus, gameplay, and features in MUD, some distinct subgroups form that can be used to help categorize different game mechanics, genres, and non-game users. Hack and slash MUDs. Perhaps the most common approach to the game design in MUDs is to loosely emulate the structure of Dungeons & Dragons campaign, focus on fighting and advancement, then role-playing. When these MUDs restrict player killing in favor of player versus environment, conflict, and questing, they are labeled hack and slash MUDs. They may be considered particularly appropriate since, due to the room-based nature of traditional MUDs, ranged combat is typically difficult to implement, resulting in most MUDs equipping characters with close combat weapons. This style of game was also historically referred to within the MUD genre as adventure games, but video gaming as a whole has developed a meaning of adventure game that is greatly at odds with this usage. PvP MUDs. Most MUDs restrict PvP combat, often abbreviated as PK. This is accomplished through hard-coded restrictions and various forms of social intervention. MUDs without these restrictions are commonly referred to as PK MUDs. Taking a step further are MUDs devoted solely to this sort of conflict, called pure PK MUDs, the first of which was Genocide in 1992. Genocide's ideas were influential in the evolution of player versus player online gaming. Then there are role-playing MUDs, or RP MUDs, which encourage or enforces players to act out the role of their playing character at all times. Some RP MUDs provide an immersive gaming environment, while others only provide a virtual world with no game elements. MUDs, where roleplay is enforced and the game world is heavily computer modeled, are sometimes known as roleplay intensive MUDs or RPI MUDs. In many cases, role-playing MUDs attempt to differentiate themselves from hack and slash types by dropping the MUD name entirely and instead using MUX, multi-user experience, or MUSH, multi-user shared hallucination. Social MUDs. Social MUDs de-emphasize game elements in favor of environment designed primarily for socializing. They're differentiated from talkers by retaining elements beyond online chat. Typically, online creation as a community activity and some element of role-playing. Often, such MUDs have broadly defined contingents of socializers and role-players. Server software in the tiny MUD family, or MU*, is traditionally used to implement social MUDs. Talkers. A lesser-known MUD variant is the Talker, which is a variety of online chat environments, typically based on a server software like EU2 or NUTS. Most of the early internet talkers were LP MUDs, with the majority of complex game machinery stripped away, leaving just the communication commands. The first internet talker was Cat Chat in 1990. Then there was educational MUDs. Taking advantage of the flexibility of MUD server software, some MUDs are designed for educational purposes rather than gaming or chat. Micromuse is considered by some to have been the first educational MUD, but it can be argued that its evolution into this role was not complete until 1994, which would make the first of many educational moves. Diversity University in 1993 as the first educational MUD. The Mud medium lends itself naturally to constructionist learning pedagogical approaches. The Mud Institute, TMI, was a LP Mud opened in February of 1992 as a gathering place for people interested in developing LP Mud and teaching LPC after it became clear that Lars Pensel had lost interest in the project. TMI focused on both LP Mud driver and library, the driver evolving into Mud OS. The TMI MudLib was never officially released, but was influential in the development of other libraries. And finally, there's the Graphical Mud. A graphical mud is a mud that uses computer graphics to represent parts of the virtual world and its visitors. A prominent early graphical mud was Habitat for Lucasfilm in 1985. Graphical muds require players to download a special client in the game's artwork. They range from simply enhancing the user's interface to simulating 3D worlds with visual spatial relationships and customized avatar appearances. Games such as Meridian 59, EverQuest, Ultimate Online, and Dark Age of Camelot were routinely called graphical muds in their early years. RuneScape was actually originally intended to be a text-based mud, but graphics were added very early in development. However, with the increase in computing power and internet connectivity during the late 1990s and the shift of online gaming to the mass market, the term graphical mud fell out of favor, being replaced with Mmorpg. And then we've got the last two things. So psychology and engagement. Sherry Turkle developed a theory that the constant use and, in many cases, overuse of muds allows users to develop different personalities in their environment. She uses examples dating back to text-based muds of the mid-1990s, showing college students who simultaneously live different lives through characters in separate muds, up to 3 at a time, all while doing schoolwork. The students claimed it was a way to shut off their own lives for a while and become part of another reality. Turkle claims that this could present a psychological problem of identity for today's youths. I don't know. Let me ask you. Am I Funkina? Am I also any of the other characters that I have created in any of my other video games that I devote several hours to constantly? Or am I just, living and I just bounce around, but I'm me? It's once again people just not understanding technology and being willing to just attack what they don't understand. A Story About a Tree is a short essay written by Raph Koster regarding the death of a legend mud player called Karen, raising the subject of interhuman relationships and virtual worlds. Observation of mud play shows styles of play that can be roughly categorized. Achievers focus on concrete measurements of success, such as experience points, levels, and wealth. Explorers investigate every nook and cranny of the game and evaluate different game mechanical options. Socializers devote most of their energy to interacting with other players, and then there are killers, who focus on interacting negatively with other players, if permitted killing the other characters or otherwise thwarting their play. Few players play only one way, or play one way all the time. Most exhibit a diverse style. According to Richard Bartle, people go there as part of a hero's journey, a means of self-discovery. Research has suggested that various factors combine in muds to provide users with a sense of presence rather than simply communication. And the last topic for today would be the grammatical usage in derived terms, which is just like 3 lines. As a noun, the word mud is variously written mud, all caps, mud, m-capped, or all lowercase mud, depending on speaker and context. It is also used as a verb with to mud, meaning to play or interact with a mud, and mudding, referring to the act of doing so. A mudder is naturally one who muds. Compound words and portmanteau, such as mudlist, mudsex, mudfiation, are also regularly coined. Puns on the wet dirt, meaning mud, are endemic, as with, for example, the names of ROMs, River of Mud, Muck, Mush, and Coffee Mud code bases, and the Mud, Muddy Waters. But, yeah. That is the Mud series. And funnily enough, we've only got 3 more RPGs to take a look at before we move on to the simulation. So we've got roguelike to go over. Roguelike might take the entire day. We've got tactical role-playing. That could take maybe half. And then, of course, I'll throw in my 3 cents on the Monster Tamer as well. And then we move on to the simulation. So, yeah. That is all I have for you today. I hope you all enjoyed. And until the next time, everybody, stay funky, people.